You might remember this image, and this when we were talking about different clone tools like the stamp. We could grab some of these pixels and throw them over top. We also talked a little bit about perspective. Like let's say, for example, I said, oh, I'll just grab some of this asphalt from up here near the shadow's edge. Option click, boink, I've got these pixels. If I tried to clone them down to here, it's the same asphalt, right? It should be about the same. Except look at how small that gravel becomes in the asphalt because of the perspective. We've got some gravel that's really far away and therefore smaller. Cloning it over to here, it comes out way too small. If we went the other direction, if I said, well, let's just take some of this gravel over here and clone it up to here, whoa, the gravel comes out huge because it's so much closer to the camera. So you need to take into account perspective issues as well. As long as I kind of go horizontally from this size to this size, we should be okay. Now we also talked about if we had to get rid of this kid over here. You can try to imagine what would be behind there. Yeah, the door would be fairly straightforward. We could grab this little part here, clone it straight down over top. Everything looks pretty good. We could grab a little bit of this and clone it over. We could probably imagine what was happening down here as well. What might be a bit more problematic? Let's take a look at this brick wall here. If we had to clone some of this stuff over top, well, the line of bricks up here is actually tilting upwards a little bit. The line of bricks down here is actually tilting downwards. These bricks are bigger than those bricks. So if I tried to clone, the size of the bricks might be all over the place. Everybody played around with the Vanishing Point tool? Let's take a look at that fella briefly. It's a quick filter. If I just go into the filter menu, there's something called Vanishing Point. I just want to quickly show you how this thing here works. With the Vanishing Point, it tells you to click the four corners of a perspective plane or object in the image to create an editing plane. Well, let's give that a try. Zoom in on this little door frame here, and if I click on a corner, get this little stringy thing here, click on another corner. I'm looking for a rectangular plane, and I've tried a few things on this. I tried using the bricks over here and try to define a plane and use these vertical lines here, but I find this door frame works pretty good. And I'll go down to the bottom corner here, click on that corner, move over to this corner, click on it, and I've got an editing plane. So if I had to do some cloning, I could use the clone stamp, and it will actually clone in perspective. Now, how do I get this onto this plane over here? When we have this plane selected, if I grab a corner, I can stretch the plane out longer, basically right off into infinity, or if I hold the Command key, I can drag off a second plane that comes off this direction. Now, if the perspective ends up not quite right, like you notice at the top here, it's not quite following the top of these bricks, you can hold the Option key, grab a corner, and I can nudge this down until it follows the plane of these bricks over here. Now, if I take my clone stamp, and I sample some of these bricks up here, move down below, I can now clone in perspective. So the angle will be taken into account, the fact that it gets larger. You can see how that point gets larger as I come across, and it gets smaller as I go down this way. If I keep going this way, it'll get even smaller, and we can clone in perspective. Okay, so that'll kind of take into account these angles, the fact that the angles are changing as we go across. And if we wanted more planes, if I wanted to do like a full, maybe I want to do the asphalt down below, I can grab my selection tool here, grab this plane with a Command key, I can pull off another plane, and this one will follow across the asphalt. Now, just be careful with stuff like this. This is a lot of perspective. Like, and you remember how small the gravel was up here. If I tried cloning a big distance, let's say I sampled this and I pulled it down to here, look at what happens. It brings it to the right size, but because it was so small, if you take something small, scale it up, it's going to get a little bit soft. And same kind of deal if I went from something over here, if I sampled some of this stuff where it's huge, moved it over to here where it's tiny, there's my original, remember it left at the same size, it'll make it smaller, but it'll also look quite a bit crispier. If you have something that's really high res and you scale it down, there's a little bit of inherent softness in the digital process, and I've taken that large stuff and scaled it down, it looks a little bit sharper. But if I'm just going a small distance, and need to go from, say, here up to here, it'll match that perspective nicely. Grab it from here down to here, it'll enlarge it as needed. Okay, so that's another way you can kind of take that perspective into account. Guys, there's another feature that I wanted to quickly show you. I've gone to that image from last semester, the barn there, and if I just throw a plane onto the side of the barn, remember we can stretch this around afterwards. Like to try to find the ground in the bottom of this image, I'd never figure out where the corners are. So if you just use the piece of the wood here, you can grab a corner and you can then drag that back down to the ground. And let's say I wanted to put a plane on this side over here. Remember, if you hold down the Command key, you can drag a plane off perpendicularly. But what if I wanted to put one across the roof of this building here? If I Command click, it's going to come off at 90 degrees, but we can change that angle. I can swing that anywhere I need it to go. So I could swing this around so it matches up with the side of the roof up there. So then I could do some cloning around on the shingles on the roof. Just this weekend I had to use the Vanishing Point tool. I was doing the cover for Owl magazine, and it's often a bunch of images composited together. In this case, the cover is going to be a girl cut out, put in the front, and some skyscrapers added into the background. And the original pictures they had, you can see the skyscrapers didn't come quite all the way down to the bottom. Here they kind of duplicated and stuck it back over top. So I ended up having to use this tool to extend the bottom. The original image was only this high. So I used the Vanishing Point to find a plane on the side of the building here and use that to extend it downward. And same thing with this building on the side over here. Here's the original height of the building. I needed to extend the bottom down, so I used the Vanishing Point to find a plane, and I was able to clone that bottom downwards as well. You'll notice that things don't match up perfectly, like some of the lights are a bit odd. The brightness didn't match around here, but for the most part it was going to be behind the girl with the blueprints anyway. So there you go, Vanishing Point used in real life.